Hello, and thank you for joining us. The Southeast Mental Health Technology Transfer Center is pleased to present today's webinar event, Tools for Employment, Lessons from Supported Employment, which is part 4 of our Keeping It Practical series. Before beginning our presentation, I'd like to review information about our center and a few notes for today's event. Please note that the work of the Southeast MHTTC is supported by a grant from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. We use affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all activities. We are proud to serve the 8 states in HHS Region 4. Our experience in public health programs provides a unique lens through which we can address mental health priorities. Please visit our website to learn more. A few important notes to review for today's event. This event is being recorded and will be made available on our website for on-demand viewing soon. We encourage you to share your comments throughout the presentation using the chat feature. Please remember to select Chat with all attendees. We've allotted time at the end for our presenters to answer questions. Please submit your question using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Finally, for those who are interested, a certificate of attendance is available for download after completion of our evaluation surveys. At this time, I'd like to welcome Dr. Michelle Salyers, who will introduce today's event and presenters.
Great, thank you very much, and welcome everyone. I'm so excited to be back here with you again. For those who have been to other sessions we have had, and welcome to new people. So today I'm really excited to introduce our speakers, Dr. Marina Kukla, who is a longtime collaborator and a good friend of mine. She is a research scientist and a clinical psychologist at the Raudebush VA in Indianapolis, and is also part of the HSR&D Center for Health Information and Communication. And she's also an associate research professor in my home department of psychology at IUPUI in Indianapolis. And I've worked with Marina, well, since she was in grad school, so that's been a while now. And her areas of expertise are improving work functioning and other community outcomes for people with psychiatric disorders. And her work particularly emphasizes supported employment. And she's very interested in ways to help promote agency and self-directed recovery in adults with severe mental illness. And I'm so glad that she also brought along Amy Strasburger, and she is also a longtime collaborator of ours. She's currently a vocational rehabilitation counselor at the same VA in Indianapolis, and she got her bachelor's in social work at Ball State University in Indiana, and then went on to get her master's in mental health counseling and gerontology. But she worked with us, and especially with Marina, for about 15 years as a program manager. And for the past 2 years, she's been working in supported employment. So you'll get to hear from both the research expertise and the clinical applied expertise all together. So I will turn it over to Marina and Amy, and then I'll come back at the end to help with questions.
Well, thanks so much, Michelle, and everyone for having us. Do we want to share the poll now, sort of the pre-confidence poll, or I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. So what level of familiarity do you have with supported employment? And then the second question, how confident are you that you can help clients use tools for employment? And then we'll have another poll at the end. Okay. All right, do you see the main slides page? Okay, perfect. All right, so Michelle thank you for that wonderful introduction. I think that she kind of told everyone a little bit about us, but Amy and I both have been in this field a long time, working with adults with serious mental illness and various recovery-oriented approaches, especially employment. I'm both a researcher and a clinical psychologist. So I have a research role and a direct care role. And then of course, Amy is working as a voc rehab counselor in supported employment now. I actually got my start in this field when I finished undergrad. I actually got my first job in supported employment in the community, and I had to figure out how the heck I was going to help people get jobs. It seemed really challenging, and so, but it got me really interested in this field and thinking about vocational recovery in particular. All right. So our plan for today, I'm going to go over a brief overview of supported employment and its principles and provide a little background as well. And then Amy and I were hoping to really focus on some practical tips. We did some job development research a few years ago where we did a large nationwide survey in the VA, but we were hoping to try to understand what really works when dealing with employers and dealing in job development in particular. Also going to talk a little bit about how to engage people, some things that might be helpful, as well as a team-based supported employment approach. And then Amy was going to take us through some thoughts on, I call it new approaches in a changing world, but basically that means that since the pandemic, things have really changed. The landscape seems to have shifted a bit, and how you might approach this work for sure. All right, so in terms of background, most people with SMI, they want to work. And we've found this over and over again when we ask the question, but most are not involved in employment. They don't have jobs, and many don't have access to support services like supported employment. For those who do get jobs, job tenure tends to be short. The first job can range 4 to 8 months, we found. But we also find that on the other hand, that work has a lot of positive benefits for people. There are many, I'm only going to name a few here, but it results in better self-esteem. People feel part of the world. They feel more connected to others, enhanced interpersonal outcomes, fewer psychiatric hospitalizations and less symptoms. And then, of course, better quality of life and a greater sense of well-being and connection. And then, of course, higher income. On the other hand, we find that unemployment leads to greater levels of disability and lower levels of quality of life and self-esteem. So employment is really important. And, you know, I think early on, most of us here, of course, know this, but I think there was some concern that if we help people with SMI get jobs, or if they go out there, they might fail or it might go poorly, and they might get sicker. But there's been a number of studies that, you know, we've been a part of and many other groups showing that in fact, it's much the opposite. And so these services, of course, are particularly important for those reasons. So what is supported employment for those who may be a bit less familiar? So when we talk about evidence-based supported employment, we're talking about the individual placement and support model, or IPS. This was developed for people with SMI. It has a focus on competitive jobs. So we're helping people get regular jobs. These are jobs that are open to anyone that pay at least minimum wage. So this is as opposed to a non-competitive job, which might pay less than minimum wage and only be open to people with disabilities and might be time limited. It really emphasizes job development, which means working with both clients and employers on developing a job and helping that person get a job that's right for them. And this is I think the big piece of it. And so that's why we're going to focus on some practical strategies today. It involves a rapid job search. The idea here is that there isn't a long period of pre-employment activities that are required before you start helping the person find a job. I think the goal is that when you start with someone, within about 30 days, you've had contact with an employer on their behalf. Supported employment is best integrated with mental health services, and Amy can speak to this as well, but the idea is that you may be physically co-located and you may be connected with some specific clinics where people with SMI, people on your caseload and supported employment are being served, and you work together to best assist and serve that person. Supported employment has sort of a zero exclusion policy. The idea is that supported employment doesn't limit its services to people based on certain criteria. So anyone, even if they have severe symptoms, maybe they have a history of criminal justice involvement, maybe they're having housing instability. Supported employment doesn't exclude services based on any of those criteria or any others. It involves time unlimited supports. So this is follow along support. So you help someone get a job, they start and you follow up with them. You might follow up with the employer too, but the idea is that you are trying to help them keep the job. You offer those supports as long as the person sort of wants it. So it's based on their preference. Some people don't want it at all, and some people may want it and need it for a longer period of time. As I've kind of said here already, it's based on client preferences. So we're helping people get a job based on what they want to do and where they want to work. And if, many people may not have figured that quite out yet, so we help them go ahead and do that. We're not placing everyone at one business where we might have a close contact or an employer relationship. Every job developed is individualized. And then lastly, we refer people for high quality benefits planning so that they can understand and are fully aware of how employment might affect their disability benefits, whether they're on SSI, SSDI, veteran benefits, or other things perhaps. So, and then I put here, I got this from ipsworks.org. This is sort of the one-stop shop for everything IPS. It's an extraordinary resource for supported employment and as well as tools for implementation. So please check that out if you haven't already. So just a comment on who does supported employment serve. So it was developed for people with SMI and extensively tested. So we're talking usually about people with schizophrenia spectrum or other psychotic disorders, people with bipolar disorders, people with major depressive disorder who have a functional limitation. It's been expanded though into other populations very successfully in the VA, and it's been tested extensively in people with PTSD, finding that a big advantage for supported employment compared with other models of vocational services with regards to helping people get competitive jobs. It's also been used successfully in folks with co-occurring substance use disorders, spinal cord injury, and polytrauma. It's also been used extensively in the VA in that area. It's been integrated and is starting to be used more for folks with first episode psychosis. And just in general, across the board, people with major psychosocial barriers, as I already mentioned, and it's really appropriate for everyone, people receiving disability benefits, and we serve people across all ages, genders, and then racial and ethnic groups. I'm not going to go into the research evidence because Amy and I wanted to keep this as practical as possible. I will just say that there's a huge body of evidence supporting supported employment as being effective compared with other models. It's been used and tested in the US and across the world. The sort of gold standard for research studies and evaluating whether something works are these randomized control trials. There's been 28 randomized controlled trials of IPS, 27 of which shows that it works better at helping people get competitive jobs compared to other vocational models. Overall, if you look across all those studies and everyone who was included, about 55% of people who got IPS supported employment got a competitive job versus only about 25% of those who received other sorts of employment services. The evidence for job tenure or how long people keep those jobs is a little bit more mixed. However, it's still very positive. Even though the initial job tenure might be brief, when you look over a longer period of time, let's say 10 years, we find that a large portion of people who get SE become steady workers, which is usually defined in research as working half the follow-up period. So if you look over 10 years, a large portion of people work 5 or more years during that time. And so I'm going to talk in a second about implementation, but I just say here that implementation, this is a complex service and implementation can be challenging, but there are many resources out there to support this. So I was going to mention this just briefly, and this is not in any way an exhaustive list. For example, I don't mention financing here and how this is paid for, but I am going to mention some of the tools that are available and helpful and part of a high quality implementation model for this. So at the top, when first implementing this, leadership support is critical, as well as agency buy-in and just the overall agency culture, which includes the staff level, of course, and beliefs around supported employment and whether people can work and have success. In terms of implementation tools, there are training tools and technical assistance available. The IPS Works website has online training resources, educational materials, and then also another piece of this would be initial supervision and support in doing this. Another key part of this is ongoing fidelity monitoring and feedback. So when programs first start, one benchmark might be to start this fidelity monitoring about 6 to 9 months after initial deployment. And then I think one thing that's been really helpful has been the development of an IPS learning community where people who are doing this work in different places can come together and share resources, learn from one another, and solve problems. The last thing I'll say is that tracking outcomes in SE programs is really helpful and can let us know how we're doing and how we can adjust. All right, so now I'm going to get to maybe some of the good stuff here. Hopefully, I'm going to talk about some of the research that Amy and I and Michelle and others have been a part of. So a few years ago, we did a large VA study where we asked supported employment and voc rehab specialists to tell us what they were doing in job development. And we asked them to talk about sort of the best practices, especially in dealing with and working with employers in job development. We also asked them to tell us how much job development they were doing, how frequently they were having those interactions, and what they thought of job development. And I can tell you, I'm going to focus on the former, but I will tell you that overall, people found it very difficult because it can be really hard. And they were doing sort of a modest amount of it, but that sort of varied widely. So we had, just to give you a quick overview, we had 233 respondents to this survey all across the country. So it was pretty representative. So it wasn't specific to any local context. People were working in urban areas, rural areas, various SES levels. And so it was pretty representative. So I'm going to talk about the themes. These are the overarching findings when we ask people, like, what do you do for job development? What works best with employers? And tell us how you do that. The first thing is maintaining an employer focus. And this is sort of termed, or we term this, dual customer approach. So you serve both the client, but you also have to serve the needs and interests of the employer. And this is a balance that has to be struck, of course. Can be challenging to do that. And so some of the basics in doing that up front might be just showing general interest in the business, learning about it, asking questions about it, showing the employer that you care about their bottom line and what their agenda is, what they're hoping to get out of this, what their hiring needs are. Using targeted marketing strategies. This could be a formal cost benefit analysis of hiring clients through an SE program. The specific benefits of hiring your client or people with disabilities in general, walking them through some of those processes, developing customized marketing materials for your program. And really, a lot of this comes down to utilizing a sales technique, because a lot of this is just selling, but it's much more complicated than that, because we're working with people and trying to help connect them with jobs. But those are some of the things, the general approaches that people were using. So in terms of the interaction, the respondents of the survey said that the preparation and follow-up was really key. So as I mentioned, like researching the business so that when you go in to talk to someone there, they take you seriously. You already have some information that may also guide you to who you need to talk to or how to go about that initial interaction. Preparing that formal marketing pitch, you may or may not give it, but having something ready and using as many specific materials as you can, which might include, in addition to that those marketing materials, business cards and flyers for your program, making an appointment in advance. This obviously was more in regards to face-to-face job development, which Amy's going to talk a little bit about, but that may be happening less now, of course, during the pandemic. But even still, making an appointment versus just dropping in. People said when they did drop in, it was important to do it at a not busy time for that business. So now it might involve making a virtual appointment to have a phone call or something else. Getting information on the application process was a key goal of that interaction. So going into it with your specific goals, and getting the information on hiring, on what they're looking for, and how to go about the application process. This comes up several times across our themes, but this idea of timely and thorough follow-up with that employer seems to be critical to a positive outcome. So another role that vocational specialists can play in supported employment is one of advocating and educating employers. This is obviously going to depend on the client and what they want and need, and the employer, frankly, too. But the idea on educating employers on best strategies to work with folks, and doing that in a way, of course, that makes sense, but also very critically, educating them on how to accommodate disabilities on the one end, and then with clients, walking them through how to request those reasonable accommodations and how to navigate that, especially early on in that employment relationship. That is extremely tricky, of course. Other roles as appropriate might be educating employers on mental illness just in general, and on psychosocial issues that might accompany that. And one big goal here is just dispelling common stereotypes and stigma that exist and that many employers might have. Even in my job, I come across that sometimes, and I have to delicately do that. And I know Amy as well has to think about how to work through some of those issues. Also, just again, talking them through SE services broadly and what they have to offer and how that can be mutually beneficial to the employer as well as our side of things. And then walking them through the idea of disclosure decisions, how that works, and how that's up to each individual as well. So I'm going to talk about just a few more nuts and bolts strategies that were highlighted in our findings. These are sort of more employer tailored strategies. So I mentioned follow-up, but the idea of continuing to persist and have frequent employer contact after the initial meeting, even if there isn't a specific client, if it's an employer that it might make sense to develop a long-term relationship with, that frequent contact can be really helpful. A lot of people said that they might start with more of a personal rapport first and then bridge sort of the business relationship after that. And there are various ways of doing that. People said they would patronize the business personally, and then it was easier to talk about their role as a supported employment specialist, and then to continue checking in. It's a little bit different now. Those check-ins might be virtually or over the phone versus stopping in with donuts or something. But there can be little touches too, like sending thank you notes that are really appreciated by people, and that can again build those relationships. Something else that came up was, if you're in person, one strategy that can be helpful is, if you find the right person, is to ask for a tour of the business, because you get individual face time with that person. You can ask your questions, you can learn about the business, but that really worked as a method to start to build that relationship, and learn about the business at the same time. So this is an obvious thing that I think we've all done, but using personal rapport and relationships, or maybe the client we're working with has relationships or knows someone at a business and they might want to work there. Sometimes building from those relationships, and then trying to get your foot in the door with that business. So how to do it? These were characteristics that were identified by the vocational specialists as important. So I think the first one is the biggest key, which is that you have to be totally honest and sincere regarding both the strengths of the client, but also the weaknesses. And of course, this might involve explaining what's gone wrong in the past. It might involve explaining why a person was terminated from their most recent job, or of course, if they have a felony or other criminal background, that has to be explained, and for that background check. This came up for me recently. I work in an SMI clinic, and I have a client who was looking to get another job, but he most recently was terminated from his job. And I sought some advice we have a study now where we're working with 3 supported employment programs in the VA, and I sought their advice on how I might talk with him about that. And they said, the biggest thing is he has to be totally honest about what happened. He can't sugarcoat it, because that just obviously won't work, but it's also very hard to do. And so for him, it was a matter of preparing for that conversation and thinking through and practicing what he was going to say. So that was really helpful advice, obvious, but still helpful to have. The other thing is, of course, this is such a hard role. I mean, there are many triumphs and successes, but there are also many failures in job development. It just doesn't work out, or you get someone a job, of course, and then they lose it quickly. There's lots of stuff that happens, but you have to be proactive and obviously resilient and persistent, even in the face of those challenges. Of course, as I mentioned, if this is a sales approach, you have to be strong at communication and listen well to both of your sort of customers, the client and the employer. And you have to be flexible. Obviously, that's the name of the game, and solution focused, because a lot of different things are sort of thrown at you and presented for you to address. I was going to mention a couple things on the next 2 slides. So this is not from our job development study, but this is something, actually, that's not true. Some of these were identified in that study, but this is also something that Amy and I sort of identified through our years of working with this. And using a team-based approach, if you work in a team. Obviously, if you're on your own and you're not a part of a larger vocational team, this wouldn't be as helpful. But the idea of, you can keep a coordinated list of employers and job leads and who the connection is with that employer. And then you can use that to bridge a relationship. You can use that team as a way to discuss clients and staff and conceptualize them. And then that can help further guide a tailored approach for what would work for that person. And then, of course, this is a place to troubleshoot and problem solve, provide support, and share ideas. And then having a supervisor who's obviously expert in this field and who has done this work is very helpful as well. I mentioned this before with the learning community, but having a community of practice of other people as well who might be doing supported employment outside of your setting, but can share lots of great ideas and what's been working for them. Amy, did you have any thoughts about this that you wanted to add based on your experiences, or?
Yeah, I mean, and I think I've been thinking through lots of examples that I'll share probably in a couple of slides for sure.
Okay, cool. All right, so the sort of last thing I wanted to say about this piece is this idea of engagement. Amy and I were talking about this earlier, but obviously engaging people can be so incredibly challenging and it can take a long time. And what we found that has worked is sort of an assertive outreach approach to people, being flexible, giving people time, collaborating with other services. And this is where that mental health integration piece is also incredibly helpful. Understanding and sort of meeting people where they are. Basically, this idea that, of course, people are at different stages of employment and they might be ready to move at different paces. We work a lot with this. Some people might know they need additional income and maybe they'd want to get a job, but they don't have that goal more formed than that. Other people might have a very specific and well-formed employment goal or thoughts about what they want their career to look like. So one way we have addressed this is that Amy and I have developed and worked on a series of studies developing an adjunctive set of interventions, and specifically one that we're working on now. We have an ongoing VA study, but we're at 3 supported employment sites or around the Midwest, but we're looking at an intervention that does address some of those psychological factors that might be barriers to people's goals, and also might be barriers to engagement in general, period. And so we have developed a cognitive behavioral group therapy that is specific to employment. It's specifically for people in SE. And so we are taking a look at that. What we've found is, we can identify certain patterns, and we use all of those examples in our manual that all the participants get. But it might be, for example, someone hasn't worked in 15 years and they're terrified to get back out there again. It might not go so well. They might face failure. And so that's something that we found that with an intervention like this that we can address. It might be that someone is an older person and they think like no one wants to hire someone of my age. Those types of thought patterns is something that we can address and work on. It might be similarly someone who's been in prison and now they're out and they need to get a job. They have lots of thoughts about their lack of abilities. Those can serve as significant barriers to people taking meaningful steps towards employment. One thing that, many of us have, of course, experienced is we work with someone, they have no problem getting the job, but then they immediately walk off the job or it blows up or things go downhill really quickly. And we're very frustrated. And we, of course, don't want that for them. We want things to go well. I mean, that's another thing that we address are those sorts of behavioral patterns that continue to get in the way. And I think the idea is that we're not just talking about, well, this person has schizophrenia, they have symptoms. No, we're talking about there are other factors that all of us have experienced. Like maybe we're all nervous when we go to an interview. We all have to address that. And so there are lots of human experiences, but maybe a little bit different for people with SMI. But with these sorts of services that can complement supported employment, we're doing the study. We think it's helpful, of course, but we'll find out. But anyways, that this can further bolster employment outcomes and be helpful. All right, and so now Amy was going to take us through some thoughts on sort of new strategies or just the obvious sort of changes. As I said earlier, it feels like the landscape has shifted during these last 2 years. And I think for some psych rehab services, but maybe more employment more than any other, it seems to really matter. So Amy, thanks for coming on. I'm so glad you did. to talk about this.
Yeah, so I'm just going to kind of talk some about what this really looks like now. And obviously, it's not changing the IPS model by any means, but just how do you practically kind of apply some of this, especially with a switch to a more virtual life and work environment for all of us over the past couple of years. So I think first of all, just, the face-to-face employer contact. I know when I went through my training about 3.5 years ago, it was to hang out in places of employment, potential places, and shake hands and bring in food. And all of that's not really the atmosphere that we're in right now. So I've seen a real strong switch to email, and even, phone calls are great too, but I think always just meeting that potential employer wherever they are. So I found that for some, when I call them and leave a voicemail, they might not check their voicemail for another 24 hours. And then when they call me back, I am busy, and it just kind of can prolong the process. So if email's preferred, then that's just what I use. Also, it can help to really just have some of those quick responses. Most of us have our phones with us available all the time. And so employers are the same way and can really respond quickly. So also, that being said, it's not being shy about if I send an email and it goes with no response, then I maybe send a reminder. Obviously, try not to be annoying, but at the same time, just keep that connection going. And if my initial contact wasn't the right one, you just spend a little time kind of researching online and maybe finding someone who is likely to respond to you. And now more than ever, employers are really willing to be creative and to make accommodations. So using that to our advantage and just asking for whatever it is that your client needs. So it might be a location preference. I know a client that I have had recently that's had a lot of success. He hadn't worked in 15 years and just had a lot of paranoia and concerns with even leaving the house. And part of that was riding the bus. And so we were able to find a job for him that was close by. He could walk if he wanted to, or he could take the bus if the weather was if it was a snowy day or icy day. But for him, being really close and not having to have long bus rides or switch buses made all the difference. So he has now been employed for a year, and just this month was able to get Employee of the Month, which was very exciting for him. So just really taking the time to get to know, what does your client need? Another example might be if someone takes medication and just simply doesn't do well in the mornings, then not pressing them to work in the mornings, maybe making sure they have a shift that's in the evening when they are more likely to be able to succeed. So just really thinking through any of those client needs, and also asking, what does the employer need as well? And now is a great time where we can hopefully be more creative and get some of your clients hired. All right, you can go ahead and switch to the next one.
I was going to ask say a quick follow-up thing. You had mentioned that because there's such a low supply of workers, employers are more willing to make accommodations for clients in supported employment. So don't be afraid to ask and advocate. I wasn't sure if you had anything else on that.
Yeah. So I think even just with previously, I know that there would be like set shifts that different employers would say, well, this shift runs from 5 to 9 and it's Monday through Friday. And I had somebody who only wanted to work on Tuesdays and Thursdays, let's say. I just think now if we ask and that employer is maybe, I don't want to say desperate to hire, but really needs people, they'll be more willing to take in some of those considerations that perhaps they wouldn't have had in the past. Or if someone's schedule, I'd say a lot of it has to do with scheduling. If someone has children that they have to, get on the bus in the morning and can't get to work at a certain time. And previously that maybe an employer might not have been willing to make that adjustment. I've noticed that there just seems to be a lot more of opportunities to make those different accommodations.
Yeah, this also obviously speaks to job carving. And that's something that I've observed as well clinically, that many of my clients who are working, even whether they're in supported employment or advocating on their own, they, the ability to carve out a role that works better for them. I have someone who works in a manufacturing setting, and because of her unique needs, she said, I'm not able to work on certain machinery. And I think in the past that would have been a big problem. They would have said, you don't do those, you go home, you don't work here anymore. That's sort of the environment, but they were totally fine with it. She's been able to carve out something that works really well for her and she's very comfortable with. So
Definitely. And so the one thing that I always remind myself daily is that my job is just to help remove barriers for both the clients and the employers. I was at a conference yesterday on supported employment, and they were sharing that we are barrier busters, is what the term they used. So just really thinking through if that is, I know for some of the clients I work with, it's that just there's a move towards technology. So maybe it's an online application that they don't feel comfortable with, but that's really a one-time thing that they don't have to continue to know how to do maybe for that particular job. It's just part of the initial hiring process. And so again, just helping whatever those barriers look like, helping to remove those. And then also asking the employer, what is it they need? What makes this process the easiest for them? And just continuing to build those connections to make it both easier for your client and your employer. And since I haven't seen as many people in person or been able to have what feels like those traditional personal relationships, I've tried to maybe send just even a little $5 coffee gift card or a thank you. And to some of these people, honestly, that I've sent them to, I've never met them outside of a virtual environment. And that impact really makes a difference. And I know one example, I think when you have those connections with someone else and have made things easier for them, made hiring process easier for them, they're willing to maybe go the extra mile for you. I had someone recently I was working with that had reported no federal background or any felonies. And when it came to the background check, that was not the case. And the individual that was interviewing her and working with her was able to place her at a different site that didn't have the same requirements. And I truly think that that was because of the ongoing relationship I've had with this particular business. They were willing then to go the extra mile and work for that client to make it work for them. And I know Marina mentioned this earlier, but just really being an advocate for the mental health care. I know sometimes I can feel borderline like a case manager as well, but having that consistent mental health care is really important. And it's been difficult for some of our clients to navigate over the past couple of years. So just helping them to navigate that process, which also leads to work success. And then assisting clients with the virtual environment. So there's definitely a switch to less in-person interviews, or even just kind of that first step process might be over the phone, or it might be over Zoom or Teams, or all these different virtual avenues that we have now. And so helping your client to navigate that can be brand new for them. I know I had someone I was working with that had been in prison for 30 years, I believe. And it was his entire adult life. And he said that, he heard people talking about text messaging and he didn't even know what that was. He said he used the example that he truly felt like a dinosaur. And so just reminding yourself that this might be brand new for some of the individuals you're working with. And so just going over those basics and providing some of that practice so that they feel comfortable. So maybe it's setting up some virtual sessions or sending some text messages so they can practice what that might look like, also going over that, the personal presentation still matters, even if it's a virtual interview, and, what's going on in the background. I can give some negative examples of what not to do, I guess, during this. And I'm sure some of you have, you've maybe had some of those virtual appointments that well, but just reminding still, it's, all those basics, showing up on time, looking professional, those kind of things are just as important virtually. And then also, this doesn't have to do with virtual, but just reminding individuals that a drug test might be part of that hiring process. And so to have people prepare for that, and not in a judging way, because IPS is zero. There's no one that we won't work with, but it's just reminding them that that could be a possibility, so it doesn't catch your client off guard.
Thank you, Amy. That was really helpful. All right. So I think that's kind of what we had for today. Please feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to provide more information, or if you have questions or would like copies of the article that we talked about today. So I did have here, I know there's Michelle, you were going to lead the Q&A, but I had a prompt that if you wanted to share in the chat one thing that you took away from this, or that you maybe might think about applying, please go ahead and do that. And then I was also going to talk about, in two weeks from today, Dr. Angie Rollins is going to talk about tools for reducing substance use, lessons from IDDT. So please sign up for that. That should be an excellent session that I'm looking forward to. Michelle, did you want to do the Q&A or?
Yeah, thanks, Marina. That was a great presentation. I have to open my chat. It doesn't look like we have anything in the Q&A section yet. One question that came up before was, what do you see are main differences between working in a system like VA and where a lot of the people might be in other settings, like a community mental health center or other places like that?
Well, I can give my thoughts, and it may or may not be totally on the mark, but my sense is that the elements of IPS and how they're implemented is largely the same in the VA. It was first implemented around 2008 and involved many of these rigorous implementation tools that we talked about, notably fidelity and training and technical assistance. One difference in the VA that may be slightly different, of course, is that, like, Amy works within a team of other voc rehab counselors. She's doing SE, but the VA has other programs as well. And so she's doing SE, but there's a couple other programs, slightly different vocational models. But I think she, though, at the same time, still has an opportunity to do sort of team-based supported employment and still share job leads and support one another and staff clients and, try to troubleshoot. I didn't talk about in this presentation some VA specific things, but my opinion is that in supported employment, selling the hire a hero narrative sometimes can also be a benefit and lead to some of those job connections, which obviously when you're working outside the VA, that may be, not something that's available to you. I think the VA, some of the clients that we work with, they want federal jobs. And so in the VA, knowing the federal hiring process, which is quite onerous for, both ways, like you have to know it inside and out. That's something that might be a little bit specific to the VA as well, because so many veterans would like to pursue work inside the government. Amy, do you have other thoughts on that, on how it might be different?
Yeah, I don't think it's that different. I mean, we still go out. It's not just VA based. You know, we completely go out in the community and make all those connections. I also think we have a wide area that we serve, so it's not just in the immediate Indianapolis area either. So I think that that's similar to supported employment in other places. And I see some questions now coming in.
Yes. So Jennifer asks about barriers to employment because people might have a fear of losing their benefits. And how do you maybe handle that when you experience it?
Yeah, I mean, and definitely that's completely a barrier. And so just helping the client research, what does that look like? Also, how long could they work, and how, like, helping them file if they do want to take that. I guess I don't know if it's different state to state, but I know for us, it's in Indiana 9 months that they could work as a trial period without having to worry about that affecting their benefits. And so just really helping, again, them be an advocate for that.
Great, thank you. There is another question from Jan. If you have any tips for working with people who are experiencing homelessness and they might not have case management support, like what would you start with?
Amy, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'm digesting that question. Okay, so they are, I didn't see it. Will you say it again to me, Michelle?
Yeah, it was in the Q&A.
Okay, I'll switch over to that one.
Different place. But when you're working with people who are experiencing homelessness and they're not hooked up to a case management team, how would you start with them? Like, where would you begin?
Yeah, and this, I mean, this probably is one of the differences maybe in VA, because we have our own homeless team that I would just refer them to, and that would be involved in that process. But absolutely, I think with supported employment, just, you know, if there's some of those greater needs that exists first, then those have to be taken care of. You know, to be able to consider working, they have to have a safe home environment. And so it might be helping them, again, like we talked about with the mental health, just then helping them to get those initial homelessness contacts and getting their living arrangement situated first.
I would also add to that, if you don't have those resources to refer them to, and I totally agree with Amy on hierarchy of needs. It's hard for people to focus on a job when they don't have a stable place to live, or they might lose their housing. That comes up a lot. But another thing is just to simplify it as much as possible. They have far less bandwidth if you don't have a safe place to live or food to eat or any of these things that come up often. So simplifying the employment process as much as possible. People do get jobs when they're homeless. And we see people all the time that do that. It's just there's so many dramatic barriers to keeping your clothes clean and showing up at work, you know, in an appropriate manner and taking a shower, and all of these things can be a challenge, but trying to help them through that a little bit and simplifying it as much as possible. So like Amy said, doing as much for them on your end as appropriate as you can.
That's great, thanks. Well, we have a quick post presentation poll that I think Hannah is going to post. If you guys could take a minute to respond to the poll. Thank you, Hannah. And I know someone asked about how slides are accessible, and I'm not sure if Ben might be able to answer that, or Hannah could text me.
I think that answer was up on the Q&A, but those will be made available in the coming days. So they will be available.
Are they email? I guess the follow-up question was, are they emailed to folks, or do they have to go to a website and download?
It'll be on our website. So just the Southeast MHTTC website.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. So I guess I'll just move into kind of the final housekeeping. First of all, I just really want to thank both of the speakers for a wonderful and like really engaging talk, and also thank Dr. Salyers for organizing this series. The Southeast MHTTC values your feedback, and we invite you to evaluate our event. Please complete a brief SAMHSA required survey by visiting the link presented on your screen. Completion of the survey will provide information to SAMHSA and assist us in planning future events. Afterwards, you'll be automatically redirected to additional questions from the Southeast MHTTC regarding the impact of this event on your knowledge and skills. You'll be able to download a certificate of attendance for your records. Please allow 5 to 10 seconds for your browser to redirect you. Again, we really value your participation and feedback. We hope you'll enjoy us, that you will join us for future events. Please visit our website to learn more. This concludes today's presentation.